I think that's a huge impact of cinema, is the ability to create bonds between people from knowing a communal piece of art.
You summed that up
Yeah.
perfectly.
Hi, friends, and welcome back to the dorm room. I am Hayden Hartrick.
I'm William Rose-Hines. I'm into the podcast section assistant editor.
And this is Dorm Room Ramblings.
This is the new show. This is episode 2.
Episode 2.
So, Hayden and I are both here because we are both lovers of film, and we are both aiming to work in the film industry in some sense. And
Yep.
I proposed a question I really wanted to talk about because oftentimes I grapple as an artist with this concept of, do we have a responsibility to our art? Is our art supposed to be something that changes the world, reflects the world, augments our reality, suggests a possible new one? And no greater mind to talk about it on the podcast section than Hayden.
Oh, you flatter me. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about, in short, the duty of cinema, which just sounds very pretentious, but we're going to try to come...
so pretentious.
We're going to try to come at it in our own little angle, just kind of have a fun discussion, which is what this show's all about, right?
Yeah, I feel like we're like the theater masks right now because you do comedy and I'm always on drama, so we've got both perspectives.
So you've got all of the perspectives you could ever need right here in this room. There's no reason to ever listen to anything anybody else says.
You should never watch any other podcast.
Other than this episode on repeat.
For the rest of your life.
So do we want to just start off with giving just some definitions of what we think, and then we can dive deeper into everything else?
I think that's a good place to start.
All
You
right.
want to take it?
Okay. So doing this question brings up it's a lot of thought that goes into this question. And I came to this decision after talking to a couple of friends that I think, in my personal opinion, the duty of cinema is to know what you are telling the world. Because I think there's a lot of films out there in the world that do not know the message that they're sending out into the world, and because they are unaware of the message they're sending out into the world, it really muddles that message and kind of sends mixed signals. So at least in my personal opinion, I think, as a thesis statement per se, the duty of cinema is to understand the message you're trying to send out into the world and to focus on that message.
Well, it's so funny too, because every class I have taken in the writing world has always been like, before you tell a story, you have to know your story. If you don't know what you're saying, you're going to create... I'll avoid cursing on this podcast. You're going to make garbage, essentially.
Yes.
But what I would ask you is, so does every film have something it's saying?
I think whether it's intentional or not, it does. I think every single piece of art that you create is just by nature consumed by an audience, and an audience will derive a message, sometimes even ones that you were not intending. And so I think because of that, that's why it is so important to be aware of the message you're putting out into the world.
Of course. I want to go back to the first screening of Jack and Jill and ask the whole audience what the message is. Let's get a poll. But I mean, yeah, because the funny thing is, I think I mentioned this earlier when we were just chatting, but like the idea that no matter what, you're going to reflect your own views and your opinions, even if you're not intending it. So no matter what, your art, because it's a reflection of yourself, is going to end up saying something. And it's funny because we live in a world now where you have to be very precise about what you're saying. And also because I think that's part of the scary world of film for me too, is that you can make something with a message that you clearly see, but other people are going to receive it completely differently.
Because other people, I think another aspect of it is so many people have different interpretations of the world and different views of the world. And exactly like what you were saying, like we as filmmakers and we as artists we have our own view of the world, and maybe we have a message that like will come through because of that view of the world, and people will see that,
Yeah.
And it's a lot of times it's reflecting our own view. And sometimes if your view is uninformed, that can heavily be seen in art,
Yeah, and the funny thing too, this year I've really this has dawned on me that, and I mean it should have dawned on me earlier, but that like there are stories that are ours to tell, and then there are stories that are not ours to tell. And recently one of my scripts that I submitted for coverage came back, and they were like, amazing, However, there's a story in here that is not yours to tell. And I had to examine what exactly can I write from, my actual truth. So I guess that's like the duty is, I think, in my mind, just to write from your place of truth. I'm a writer, so I'm speaking from writing terms, but to create film, it just has to be from your own personal place of truth. That's the duty to the art, but is there a duty to the audience? Like what?
Which is when we get into the aspect of entertainment, because that's another deep value of film, and especially in an industry like this that is so, as much as we want it to be, there's no world where film is just the artistic expression.
Even Sundance indies are making money.
That's right. There's the entire money-making side of film, and you have to know your audience to be able to like stay true to that. And I think that you get, when you have these conversations, you bring up, can film just be entertainment? And I think it can, if that is what you're intending it to be,
Yeah.
Because I think about, funnily enough, the Fast and Furious franchise.
Of course.
Right? Because I recently, for the first time, saw a Fast and Furious movie.
Recently?
Yes. I saw Fast and Furious 9 was my first one to watch.
Is that the new one?
That's the new one.
Is that the space one?
Mm-hmm.
Oh
they
my
go
God.
into space. And it is purely like popcorn movie dumb fun. And I think there's an element that the writers understand that, or at least I hope they do, because it comes across
I
like
really
they
hope they're not in
understand
their
that.
room being like, this is so important.
Because there are some scenes like that feel like they're trying to experiment with the like going into deeper like places with their film, and it's like, okay, but is that the place in a
Do you know
car
your tone?
movie? Yeah. I don't know. It's an interesting conundrum to run into, because I don't want to ever put people in a box and be like, this is what your movie is. You can't go outside of that, because that's not what art is.
Well, my perfect example for that is Adam Sandler, right? All the Adam Sandler made movies that are just goofy fun. They're just meant to be enjoyed. They're not supposed to be, these lofty, like, here's my meaning. But then the man can turn around and do something like Uncut Gems, which is the exact opposite. But the other thing too is, even when a film I feel like is just trying to be entertainment, there's the area where it actually ends up saying something too. Because like there's that Adam Sandler movie that I tried to watch recently. I could not get through it. I think it's like Chuck and Larry Get Married or something.
Okay.
Have you seen it?
I have not. I truly have not watched that much Adam Sandler.
That's fine. Hopefully we're not offending any Adam Sandler fans out there. But this movie is from like 2005, and it's supposed to be, my roommate was like, hey, let's watch this. It's supposed to be this goofy comedy, and he hadn't seen it since he was a kid. And we put it on, and we're watching it, and I guess in 2005 it was supposed to be this goofy comedy, but it was actually really problematic, like really, really not a great representation of the LGBTQIA plus community. And we were like, okay, so they were intending just to make an audience laugh, but really they made a pretty big statement about what they believe of this entire subcategory of people.
Yeah. I was watching Futurama recently.
Oh my God,
and it's an animated show from the 90s, and it has some really bad depictions of like trans culture. And like and it was just like, sitting from a 2021 perspective, I'm like, oh, they were just trying to make a joke, but this is like bad. This is like really bigoted with what you're saying here,
And the thing that interests me, right, and I think about this a lot, do we or should we judge past like cinema, right? Judge past cinema by the standards of today. Because you look at a movie like Airplane, which since it's been made has been like the epitomal or like ensemble comedy film, but it's so so a lot. But like, should we be judging that by today's standards?
I think it's our duty to do so.
Hey!
Right? Okay. Because I think that we as people cannot evolve into the future without analyzing our past.
Of course.
If we were to look at movies like, I'm gonna say something controversial, but Rocky, I think the first Rocky is a very bad protagonist that does some really messed up stuff, right? And looking at that from our perspective now, we analyze what made that time different, and we have to learn from those mistakes and learn that and know that our world is different. And I think that is good for us, because then when we are writing and we are making, we can say, in 50 years, will what I'm saying now be looked on in a positive light?
Yeah.
You know?
I think that's one of the biggest blessings that we have as, we're not rich. We're not in the industry making, multi-million-dollar blockbusters right now. But if we get that opportunity, we are the people that are charged with creating the memory of this time period, of creating the memory of this era. Because when we look back at, the movies of the 50s, that kind of summarizes that time period for us in everything, including from fashion and the outward expression to the nuance of, the problematic side of it. And we have that response. I think it's for me, it's one of the beautiful things. Like, we get to decide how our generation is remembered by telling the stories that matter to us.
Especially because so many people are able to tell stories now.
Oh my, anyone with a phone can tell a story.
It's so accessible, and that's why it's so important to have this discussion and to know what you are putting out into the world, because there are so many people now that are affected by everything that everybody does. The world is so connected in its own way that you have to be aware of what you're doing.
Oh yeah, and I feel like, because we've all become so like hyper intellectualized about, how we take on media, like we understand the nuance of, it's like that TikTok meme that's going around right now that's like, I watch Love Island not for Love Island but for the socioeconomic going into that thing. Like, we understand so much of how this world works. I think obviously you can't completely, that when we take on media, we like dissect it by those standards, so we need to be prepared for that when we put stuff out. It's always a fun thing. I also, in terms of like the entertainment side of it, right? Oftentimes we have like, I think it was Martin Scorsese that was like, the Marvel movies are not cinema, right?
Yeah.
So I guess because we're using the term cinema to describe, the movies that create our culture. Are the Marvel movies cinema?
Yeah, right. Everything.
Should there be qualitative judgments about what makes up cinema?
I truly don't think so, because as much as I'm not going to say there's not like problematic themes in Marvel movies that may have not been intentional but kind of come through, I think there's still cinema, and there's a place for movies that not everything has to be a masterpiece, and there's places for movies that are just meant to make people happy. Not everything has to be, the most super like perfect movie, to be enjoyable and to have a place in the world. Because Marvel movies, as much as people might not want to say they're real cinema, they have had a huge impact on our culture over the past 2 decades.
Oh my God, yes.
They are without a doubt cultural time stones of our world today. And when and when people look back in the future, this will be a defining mark of our era. And so they have a purpose there. They are cinema there. They are films that define a generation, And
also because, like, with the idea of the entertainment of it, you look at the movies of the late 1940s into the 50s, coming out of World War II, but the solidification of, like, the movie musical, right? The purpose of film during that time period was to take us away from the immense sadness the world's experienced and just give us an escape. And at the end of the day, that was a valiant thing, like, to take us from the bleakness of, like, the post-World War II era and just let us, like, escape into cinema. And today, it's the same.
Yeah, that's exactly what Marvel movies are, and superhero movies and Fast and Furious movies are there for, is to allow us to escape. And they know that they're doing that, which is the reason they are able to be successful with what they're doing.
Knowing the stories you're telling. Exactly. Bringing it back.
But I am of the personal belief that even those movies that are meant to just be entertainment are made by people who care about what they're saying and about what they're making. It's not made by people who hopefully it's not made by people who just want to make money. It's made by people who legitimately want to have an impact on the world. Because I think there's a difference between writing a story to be entertaining and putting yourself out there just to make money. Because I know as a comedian, that's what I want to do. I don't tackle a lot of heavy subjects in my comedy just because I don't think I have the specific ability to do so. And so when I'm looking at myself in that, I'm like, I want to make people laugh, but I'm not doing it so people will know my name. I'm doing it because I want to bring joy to the people around me. I want to bring up their spirits. And that manifests in creating art, that will. So I think there will always be an industry. There will always be a place in the industry for people who are just wanting to make money, because they will make themselves a place in the industry.
Yep.
But I think as we evolve as filmmakers, you're always going to get better stuff by people who have a passion for it, even if that stuff that they're making is just purely for entertainment.
That's the thing. I like to hope that the industry will kind of funnel people into not where they belong, but like those who are just looking for money will have that opportunity, and those that are looking to actually create something with an impact on an audience. Because there's this wonderful book by I think Peter Brooks, I believe, called The Empty Space, on like directing and like creating arts. And one of the things he says is that like the theatricality of a piece, the cinematic nature, is always informed by the audience participation, right? Whether that is an emotional participation or a physical one, like on the edge of your seats. So for that world, for the cinematic qualities of film to evolve, I just hope that we can funnel those people in the right place. But I wanted to ask, so like you watch a pretty good amount of films, right?
I watch a decent amount.
Decent amount?
Less than I should as a quote unquote film major, but enough to.
Okay.
Like I'm not as good at being on top of like the indie scene or everything.
See, I'm the opposite. I haven't even seen Rocky.
Yeah. See,
I know,
you
it's
don't got it.
egregious.
You don't got it. You really don't got it.
Okay.
No, I try to keep on top of a lot of movies, but again, a lot of times I watch movies socially. I don't do a lot of movie watching when I'm on my own. I save that for more TV. I watch a lot of television on my own, and I watch a lot of movies with my friends. So sometimes me and my friends don't want to watch, the indie movies. We want to watch stuff like that. But I do watch enough to have a good amount to say on this conversation.
So what I was going to ask you, as an audience member, right? Like if we're doing a poll of ourselves, as an audience member, what do you get out of film? Like when you want to go watch a movie, like what does it do for you personally?
So I think for me, it can do a few things. It can give me a window into another world, which is one of my favorite things, is being able to look into like other people's experiences and really get a feel for that. It can help me reanalyze our world by looking at stuff and helping recontextualize things. And I think those are the two main things that I get out of a lot of movies. And it also, I think it gives me a thing to bond with people about, right? I think that's a huge impact of cinema, is the ability to create bonds between people from knowing a communal piece of art.
You summed that up perfectly. Because I mean, the thing too, it kind of brings us back to, the point of, or the duty of film. Like when there is a communal aspect, and on top of that, an aspect that lets you see from the perspective of someone else. We live in a world right now where nobody wants to see from anyone else's perspective. And like the fact that film can put you there and to see the emotional nuance of somebody else's life, it makes us more empathetic people. I've always believed that. The more we make an effort, even if it's just through the film we watch, to see the perspective of other people, we become a more empathetic generation. And then actual change in the world. So even something that's just
cycles on and on, because maybe we don't get all the work done in our own lifetime, but we can put pieces down for other generations to follow, to hundreds of years down the line have a better world than we have now. You know?
And I mean, for me personally, when I'm watching films, it's weird. I often get too caught up in the like, I'm going to watch this analytically from the perspective of a filmmaker so I can do better next time I make a movie. But then every once in a while when I just can't do that and I'm just like, oh, I'm lost in this other world. Because I love that you said that brings you into another world. And that's why I love fantasy movies so much. Because instantly I'm just in a complete... And that's the funny thing too. I think there's a combination... This actually might be my favorite type of movies. When it's that perfect combination of like just entertainment, but there's also some moral thematics in there. And Lord of the Rings is the first thing that pops into my head.
It's why Iron Giant is one of my favorite movies. Because on the surface, it is just a fun, like, coming-of-age story about a kid and a giant robot. But when you really look at it and you analyze it, it is a movie about, like, weaponry and who we are and defining ourselves not by the people we were created to be, but by the people that we want to be.
Shivers.
It's such a beautiful. I could go on. I could do a whole episode just about the Iron Giant. But yeah, no, it's Lord of the Rings too has. I'm not as a fantasy aficionado. I am ashamed to say I've only seen the Lord of the Rings once, and I haven't read the books yet.
My heart.
However, I do very much enjoy it, and I've delved into that world and especially looking at it, I think it's very interesting to look at Lord of the Rings from a perspective of the world it was reflecting, because it came out in the 20s, right?
Late 20s.
Late 20s, right? Like just looking at the Lord of the Rings world, it is very easy to just be like, haha, fantasy world. But if you look at it in a perspective of the world in the 20s, lots of stuff begins to click into place,
yeah. It's funny too. You bring up, the Iron Giant. Like, I find that kids' movies often do that, like entertainment and like, message combination really well. And it's funny because our generation loves to like rewatch their children's movies.
It is why I can be so critical of children's movies. I think kids' movies especially carry a heavy burden.
They have even a more important duty than a lot of other stuff.
Because we as adults can watch a movie and understand the messages it's getting across and being like, oh, this is not how the world actually works. If we watch a movie that is very like problematic and has a lot of negative things to say about things and they're not true, we as adults can be like, this is not true. This is not how this area of the world works. But kids, they don't know how the world works.
They're just like, yes,
this is it. Which is why so many people, I hate that thing of it's just a kid's movie, so we can excuse it. And it's like, no, you should be harsher on children's movies.
They're setting up our children.
Precisely. Which is why I think a lot of kids movies do good. There's a lot of really well-made kids movies that teach good lessons that can even sometimes get by parents who would rather their kids not learn those lessons,
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I think kids movies carry the heaviest burden in the filmmaking world, know?
And this is genuinely a true story that relates to this. I was in a small town in North Carolina, just driving through on my way back here last week, and the waiters sat down with me and started having this strange conversation about how Sesame Street was teaching their children to be liberal. To which in my head I'm laughing hysterically, but like, and they were so frustrated, like, and they were talking about how their kids were like expressing like these kind beliefs about all people. And I'm like, these people are talking about it like it's a bad thing, but I'm like, TV's doing these kids right, even though their parents are not on board.
There's the Mr. Rogers, like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood did that, like that's what their purpose is, because I think there is, sadly enough, there is a lot of people in this world who are trapped inside of bubbles and grow up in bubbles and are not ever exposed to the greater world. And doing that creates a cycle of bigotry, right? Yeah. And when films can break that bubble and can break that cycle, that is amazing. Because again, magical. It's the stepping stones to make a better world.
Truly.
Which is why cycling back, you have to know what you're saying, because it can be very easy for things to get misinterpreted by people.
And I think too, as creatives, that's also why it's important that we surround ourselves with people that aren't going to be sycophants, that are actually going to call us out when, like, I send my scripts around to about 15 people every time I'm done. And I have them all critique it. And I start with the people that absolutely love me and like just cherish me because they'll give me, really kind notes. I then make my changes, send it to the people that don't know me very well but are professional, and they'll give me, professional notes. And then I send it to the people that hate that hate me, and they'll just tear my stuff apart because, even that helps me grow. But it's good to have people around that'll call you out. That way things don't make it into your art that you don't see that you had as previous biases or opinions or beliefs.
It's why it's so important to have a diverse group of people that you work with, because the more extra perspectives you can have on the world, the better your art will be.
I mean, and also because I feel like, I was privileged enough to grow up in Hollywood and around a lot of industry people. And that's not as common in the industry as I would like it to be. I mean, there's a lot of people that are just yes men to each other, and thus the same narratives get told.
Sometimes that's the only way to be successful. Like, I understand that, of being in a situation where you're like, this person is somebody that is going to give me jobs.
They will pay for my food.
I cannot tell them that this sucks, right? It's why it's so important to know how to critique, because there are ways to critique and there are ways to say stuff is bad without making it feel like a person.
Oh yeah, I'm trying to master that skill now.
It's a hard skill to master. I tell you what, I'm nowhere close to mastering it, and because it's so easy for us as critiquers of art to also have messages be misinterpreted and to say things that are taken by the people who created this art and being like, you hate me, or you hate this, like, if it, like, for example, if there are movies about like certain groups of people and I don't think they're done well, you have to be very careful when critiquing that, because you have to make sure you're like, it's not that I just don't think this is a well made movie. I don't know. I started this sentence and kind of am trying to figure it out as I'm going, but I think you know what I'm saying, right?
I 100% get you. I mean, there's so much nuance to how we critique things, and it's also interesting because we even said this earlier. Like, we tell people you have to write from your most honest place, and that's how you create good art. And then after the most honest part is like ripped out of you, and you've put it on the page, and you've sweat over it, and then you hand it to someone, and they're like, "All right, here's why your truth is." It's hard to do. It's hard to critique the structure of art without getting into like the emotional context for people. But I mean, I think that's also like one of the beautiful things about being an artist is we get to work on ourselves in this way that like we can take critiques and it doesn't hurt us.
Taking critiques sometimes can help you grow it helps you grow as a person.
Oh my God, so much so.
I've become like, as I do more and more art and I do more and I get more and more people to tell me stuff about my art, I learn more about myself, which is just a wonderful experience to have.
Yeah. I was blessed. The screenplay that I finished last year that I've been happy enough to send around. I got notes back on the first draft that was like, I really do love your script. You have one scene in here, however, that is that is not going to work. Like this whole, I think it was, I have like a dream sequence woven throughout. And the general gist was like, this just isn't going to work. Like, it doesn't work with your screenplay. It feels out of place. You need to lose it. And for me, that was my favorite part of the screenplay. But then I also had to look at it and be like, I only want this in here because it's what makes me scared, or it's what makes me feel better about the possibility of this failing, in the sense that that's like, it was like my comfort blanket. I was like, because I have this in here, it feels more substantial, but if I take that out, it's just the story, and if I do that, that's terrifying. But because of that, I'm able to like look into myself and be like, oh, why do I need a safety blanket? I'm confident in my arts, like other people seem to be. So it really does help you improve as a person. And it's fun stuff. And with the little bit of time left that we have, I have one more question to pose you, my co-host. So in terms of, well, you said earlier that you do a lot of everything, right?
Yes, I try to have my foot in every single door all at once because, first of all,
a lot of feet.
I like to have the opportunity to just, if I want to make something, I can make it. I don't, sometimes, working in this industry, it's hard to get people on board sometimes. And so having the ability to make something by myself is good, but also it's good to have as much knowledge as possible because it helps with how you critique stuff. The more you know, the more you're able to say.
So one thing that I love about cinema, right, is the idea that the things you make are kind of renewable in the sense that they always touch further generations onwards and they live permanently, right? So for you personally, and I guess maybe this is a little off topic, but I'm actually just curious, what would be your idea of success? Like, what would you need to do with your films in order to feel like you've had a successful career as a filmmaker?
Wow. It's not the way I thought the question was going. Okay. So I think for me personally, I have always said I want to be a storyteller. I want my stories to impact people. And I want, in all honesty, I got into theater because a very good friend of mine was performing. And I saw him perform, and I saw the impact it put on me and the wonderful effect that his performance and this whole show that he was doing had on me, and that made me want to create. So I think, in all honesty, if my films or my voice acting or anything I do inspires other people to create something and to tell their own stories, I think I would be a success. If I can continue the cycle of telling stories, I'd be happy.
I love it. Especially, I mean, that's 100% what I was thinking when I said regenerative. You know, it's like we get to inspire the next generation. And that's, I think, the greatest gift we have. So with that, thank you guys so much for listening to another Dorm Room Ramblings. It has been a pleasure.
It has been a pleasure to talk to you as well. I'm very excited for this series to continue and to see everything else we have down the pipeline.
True. Please check out our future collaborations on film projects that will inevitably result from this podcast.
Yeah. So until next time, thank you all very much. Have fun in the dorm room.
See ya.